So after what feels like 3 million consecutive days of heavy rain, the sun finally grew out of its emo phase and decided to show itself to the rest of society. The birds are chirping, the hot breeze is blowing, and big concrete buildings are reflecting sun rays into my face. Whenever this happens, year after year, it without fail starts a certain theme song in my head and makes me think of the good times. The good times being me staring at a crappy laptop screen without moving for 8 hours a day, playing the original Mirror's Edge. I always find it crazy that it's not a game that reminds me of real life, but the opposite. Real life reminds me of a game. That's definitely not always a good thing, considering real life currently also reminds me of Dying Light or Cyberpunk, but let's not get into that. The game came out in 2008, just as chubby 12-year-olds around the world were starting to become obsessed with parkour. The game offered these kids, including myself, something that no other game did. A way to do these crazy jumps from one rooftop to another without ever having to actually lift their asses. Perfect, right? Way better than actually exercising. The game was never a mainstream success. It did alright in sales, ultimately selling around 2 million copies, but what's more important is that the people who did play it loved it. Mirror's Edge spawned a cult fanbase of people who are still fans to this day. And no wonder it did. It offered something that pretty much no other game did or has done since with as much polish and beauty. It's a first-person free-running experience that feels like it literally puts you in the shoes of the iconic main protagonist, Faith. The game did a lot of things right. The movement felt astonishingly responsive, level design was exactly what the game mechanics demanded, and the visuals were probably this game's strongest asset. I mean, just look at this. This not only holds up to this day, but still actually looks good. This came out 12 years ago. I made a video on Assassin's Creed 2, which came out in 2009, and if you put them side to side, they look like they're games from two different generations. Just imagine if whoever was in charge of Mirror's Edge art direction decided to use the same piss filter that every other game from this era used for some reason. Thankfully, DICE were brave enough to try a lot of new and unconventional things, which is ultimately why the game garnered such a passionate player base. The original game did a lot of things better than Catalyst, the reboot that came 7 years later, which is why literally every Mirror's Edge video essay on YouTube is about the first game. However, in this video I want to focus on Catalyst because I think it's an underrated visual masterpiece that not a lot of people give props to. I'll go over where the game shined and also where it sucked balls, but as the title suggests, my main focus is going to be the vibes, man. So don't take this as a review of the game, even though it kinda is, but more so a highlight of the things I love about it. I basically live for atmosphere. There's nothing that makes me happier than the artworks from lo-fi compilation videos. I'd go as far as to say atmosphere is the #1 thing I look for in games. As long as the mechanics don't get in the way, the vibes alone are enough to make me fall in love with a project. You know that IGN meme, it has a little something for everyone? Well, if the everyone was me, the something would be vibes. Shut up, that does make sense. Now, I gotta point out an important distinction. Vibes does not equal graphics. What makes a game atmospheric is a combination of a lot of factors that are specific to each individual game. For example, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines nails the atmosphere, even though it came out in 2004 and the graphics look like dog shit compared to modern games. But the city, the establishments, interiors, characters, story, and voice acting all working together do a phenomenal job at selling the dark, gritty mood of the game. Now that I've got that boring shit out of the way, let's start with why Catalyst is universally regarded as the inferior game between the two. Where do I even start? Can I just say that I don't even know or care what the story is about? I guess it's something like Big Corporation Bad. The story was not gripping at all, but what made it even worse are the characters. They're all two-dimensional and boring.
Foreign.
Yeah, I found it.
Not a question.
The dynamic between Faith and this guy is unbearable. Like, I spent half the game wishing that they just have a single friendly interaction that didn't make me cringe with how forced the rivalry felt. But without a doubt, the ultimate sin of this game is how unlikable the OG waifu Faith is. I was literally in love with her until I played Catalyst. She could have unironically been the coolest protagonist ever. Her style and appearance is cool, her abilities are cool, but her character is just so annoying. Hell, I didn't even like her voice, I just thought it didn't fit her. For half of the game, everyone's always mad at her.
Too dark to see much at all. Look, I thought that this would be a
No,
good
you
thing.
didn't think, Faith. You never do.
You made me very angry, Faith.
Faith, you've grown. Barely out of prison and already stirring things up? Your parents would be proud.
Shut your fucking mouth!
And the best comeback she can ever muster is, how about you get off my case? I mean, think about it. She's a tattooed Asian girl dripping with futuristic techwear swag, living an illegal life completely outside of conventional boundaries, fighting against mega corporations by jumping around skyscraper rooftops. All of this edge that she has going for her as a concept is totally negated by her bland and basic personality in Catalyst. The combat of Catalyst is... Gaming YouTubers use the word clunky a lot, and even though I think that's a dumb sounding word, in this context I honestly can't think of a better one. The combat is clunky at best and still clunky at worst, because let's face it, you don't get much worse than clunky.
Control.
Bruh. You slap this security guard who's presumably received extensive combat training, cause you know that's his job, and he goes stumbling away from you to infinity or until he hits an obstacle at a snail's pace, which somehow takes half of his health. It's even more hilarious when he hits a fellow guard and they both look like they've never felt the slightest amount of force before and don't know how to deal with it. Here's a big opinion. I think Mirror's Edge Catalyst could have done without any combat at all. Yes, I get that you have to have some enemies that add suspense, and I admit some of the chase scenes can feel thrilling with all the laser bullets shooting past you, but the combat is so clunky that it gets tiring the moment you first experience it. Like literally your first fight already feels tedious and unsatisfying. Not to mention how annoying random guards on rooftops are when you're just trying to explore the world and they start just unloading bullets at you. It's like they made this beautiful concrete jungle and purposely made it annoying to explore if you're not feeling like engaging in combat. You pretty much can't completely tune out your mind, relax, and just run around the world, because you know eventually you're gonna happen upon some random ass guards and be forced to endure the anxiety-provoking feeling of getting shot at.
You just have to be faster than they are.
Mirror's Edge is not a fighting game and the focus is not on combat, so having half-assed combat even be a part of the game does more to hinder it than it adds to the experience. Here's my two solutions that I think could have worked better. The first is that the combat is entirely one-sided and the only instances in which there's any shooting going on is when you're being chased. Your only option is to run efficiently and you never get to fight back. That way you get that thrill that sometimes happens in these chase scenes but eliminate all the other hindrances that the combat presents. Of course, this would only happen as part of certain missions and the randomly placed guards on rooftops would just not exist. My other solution, and one that could have been way more fun but would demand extra brain power to design around, is stealth takedowns. Faith is a master at movement and hand-to-hand combat, so it would make sense for her to be able to sneak up on someone like a cat and just snap their neck. I feel like stealth could serve to break up the running and add a whole new dynamic to the game. Now, even though I just went off on the combat, like I said, this isn't a game review, so let me just touch briefly on a couple more things that I think fall under the cons category, before finally moving on to what I actually like about this game. Flow-breaking tasks and pointless skill tree. The chips you collect that require what feels like a 10-minute animation when you've just stopped in the middle of your run to pick them up. This is the most video gamey thing about Catalyst, and it contributes a lot to it feeling like any other game. These pickups give you a meaningless amount of XP that goes towards gaining skill points. A skill point requires 1000 XP and these little shits give you about 10 each, I think. I don't even know because I don't bother picking them up. Not only is there not an incentive to get to them in terms of a challenging place to reach or something, but the skill tree is also so unnecessary, rendering these little pickups even more useless. The skill tree is weird because most of it is unlocked from the beginning, and you actually have to unlock some basic things like the roll or quick turn, which goes against the lore where Faith is already a well-established and capable runner. Those moves are basically a part of her character. That would be like if they made a game about you and put crippling anxiety as an unlockable perk. The rest of the upgrades are just minor, unexciting stuff, so you never feel the satisfaction of unlocking a substantial upgrade. This whole feature belongs in the trash as far as I'm concerned, and the game could have totally done without it. So far, it seems like every important bit of this game sucks, so why do I feel like it's an underrated masterpiece? Shit, I forgot. Oh right, it's the world. The things Catalyst does to immerse you in the world are just unlike anything I've ever played. A lot of these things apply to the original game too, but I think Catalyst excels at them even more. Let's start with the art direction. That's the first thing that hits you when you boot up this game, and damn does it knock you the fuck out. No other game that I'm aware of has a world that looks anything close to this. The color palette makes you feel like you're walking through an interactive art piece. Every corner you speed around and every door you maniacally bust through with way more force than necessary reveals a new breathtaking view, and it just never gets boring. I could go on for hours about how good the world looks, but none of my words can give you a better sense of how it feels than actually looking at it, or even better, playing it yourself. It's honestly not just the best part of Mirror's Edge, but one of the most gorgeous looking worlds in any game ever. I know people complain about it being open world compared to the first game that was linear, and I do agree that it can cause some problems because every place should theoretically have more than one way of getting to it, and that opens up a lot more room for error, but I've personally never had a problem with this. I love the open world of Catalyst. The original was my favorite game at the time, and I remember just careening my pants when I heard that the reboot is going to be open world. I agree that not every game should be open world, but if one game should, it's the game that puts freedom above everything else. The day and night cycle was also something that this game absolutely needed, and I don't think there's even room for discussion about this. The city at night looks fucking gorgeous. You can literally pick any place you want and just stand and absorb the atmosphere. The time of day never changed in the first game, but the static lighting was still phenomenal. The dynamic lighting in Catalyst is even more impressive. A big and important part of Catalyst's world are the materials used throughout it. Jacob Geller has an amazing video where he talks about how the original Mirror's Edge uses materials, so I recommend you check that out since it kinda inspired this segment. How many times have you seen grass, earth, trees, and rocks in games? Well, if you're like me and the only game you've ever played is Candy Crush Saga, then I guess the answer is not very many, but most other people have probably seen plenty. After all, those are essential things we can see everywhere around us, or at least we could until we replaced them with man-made materials like concrete, metal, and glass. Natural materials speak to our roots as human beings. They do a good job of making the game feel real as we instinctively see them as familiar and natural. Well, Mirror's Edge says fuck you to that and does the exact opposite. It puts you in the heart of an exaggerated futuristic metropolis where nothing is real and everything is man-made. The game's first-person perspective puts you close and intimate with the materials, and they do their role of making you feel like you're in a playing field that somebody else constructed. Even the materials you see in buildings in real life are unnaturally smooth, clean, and almost fake looking. The world itself is empty, and it should be. It should feel fake, plastic, and distant. I'd rather run through an empty world that looks like it does in Catalyst than have it filled with random video gamey elements that take away from the uniqueness of it. The main characters are you and the architecture surrounding you. Even the random lone NPCs standing on rooftops with seemingly no purpose other than for you to deliver something to them add to that Truman Show feeling. You know those vaporwave music videos where everything feels plastic and dreamlike because of the lack of textures and detail? Mirror's Edge does something similar while still keeping it within the boundaries of reality. This creates an effect of distance between you, a human with emotions, and your surroundings, dead and lifeless. Let me get deep with you for a second. Life itself often feels like that. Like you're just thrown into an environment where you feel like an imposter. I don't know if this is what they were going for, but either way, it doesn't really matter. On top of materials and the empty world, the perspective is also something that contributes to this feeling of distance. I don't mean first or third person, I mean the perspective you have of the city. The game nails the good kind of loneliness, a feeling of separation from the bullshit of everyday routines. You do meet some NPCs, but your perspective of regular humans is like you're looking at ants. You're so much above them that even though you can see them, you're in a totally different world. Here's another bruh moment for you. Mirror's Edge can make you reflect on the meaninglessness of your daily life. considering you almost definitely belong to the group of ants scattered across the streets that all look insignificant from so high up, all going about their mindless routines to secure fictional power and justify their existence. Actually, seeing what's below you is only a small part of the distance you feel. A bigger part is in the audio. You can hear the faint sounds of busy streets, cars, and trains constantly, and that subconsciously makes you feel like you're actually above ground and not merely above empty pits that kill you. One thing that I think could have added to this separation even further is the inclusion of more ground level missions. You know that feeling when you go from the bustling streets of Novigrad into secluded nature in The Witcher 3? I imagine experiencing the busy streets at least for a bit and then going back to running around empty rooftops would have a similar vibe. Of course, all of these things mean nothing if you're not attached to the character you're playing as. You can't distance yourself from the world if you don't feel like you're actually in it. And yes, it's very hard to relate to Faith and roleplay as her character unless you're an annoying bitch yourself, but I'm not talking about that sort of emotional attachment. I'm talking about how insanely good this game is at immersing you into its world and making you feel like you're the character that you're controlling. The first-person perspective is something that a lot of the times feels unnatural in games. You either feel like a floating head, or you're holding items so that they fit in the field of vision and not how you'd actually hold them, or the punches and kicks don't look anything like they actually would in real IRL life. Mirror's Edge has all this complex movement like slides, rolls, climbing, jumping, swinging, etc., and they somehow manage to make it all work flawlessly in first person. The perspective never ever gets in the way of these animations. When you don't manage to land a roll, you almost feel the pain of crushing into the ground, and not to mention making one slip up and realizing that there's nothing below you. Every time I fall to my death in Catalyst, my balls shrivel up and retract into my abdomen. On top of the flawless use of first-person perspective, the audio also does an amazing job of grounding you into that world. The sound of your footsteps is almost ASMR-ish, and it's so goddamn satisfying to run across different surfaces and hear the crunch of the gravel or the squeaking of your shoes on glass. I'd say these sounds are almost equally as important in putting you into Faith's body as the perspective I mentioned earlier, and fortunately it's something this game also does way better than the average game. While we're on the topic of immersion, it's worth noting that Catalyst controls extremely well. There's nothing more immersion breaking than when a game does something you didn't want it to do, and I can say that during my playthrough this almost never happened. Finally, I want to also give some praise to the game's music. Still Alive by Lisa Miskovsky from the original game is always going to be my favorite video game song. It's the theme I mentioned in the intro that always plays in my head when it's a nice sunny day outside. No, seriously, I can't get it to stop. It's been playing for days, I've been losing sleep because of it. I think this is a sign of a serious medical condition, so please send help. There's something strangely inspiring about this song that pushes me to be more productive and seize the day. So when it comes to Catalyst, I knew that nothing was ever gonna beat Still Alive, but the game does have a very good soundtrack. The best word to describe it is minimal, which is coincidentally exactly what the world of Mirror's Edge is. The soundtrack is perfect for such a clean, bright, and spacious environment. It only aids the atmosphere slightly without ever being overpowering and taking the spotlight. Overall, Catalyst could have been the perfect game to escape to and play while listening to a podcast or audiobook, if not for the abundance of unnecessary annoyances. I think that's everything I wanted to say. I've been meaning to talk about Mirror's Edge for the longest time because this franchise really left a mark on me, and games that manage to touch this cold, lifeless heart of mine are few and far in between. I'm sorry there's been such a gap in uploads. I kind of felt like shit for a while and I couldn't write or do anything productive. But then also this video took way more time to make than I expected. Not every video is going to be like this one. These just take too much brain power and usually get a fraction of the views of a video I just shat out in one afternoon. I love reading comments, so leave me a comment, subscribe, and follow me on Twitter. I've never mentioned my Twitter so far, but it'd be nice to not have all of my eggs in the same basket in case YouTube gets canceled or something. We never know, it's 2020, anything could happen at this point. YouTube could just shut down tomorrow, so go follow me on Twitter.